Hyvää iltaa ja tervetuloa Lähi-itä murroksessa webinaarisarjan pariin. Minä olen Pasi Turunen. Tässä 2 viikon aikana 16-25. päivä maaliskuuta tiistaisin ja torstaisin lähetettävässä 4-osaisessa verkkoseminaarissa käsitellään ajankohtaisia maailmanpoliittisia tapahtumia Lähi-idässä ja niiden vaikutuksia alueen asukkaiden elämään sekä ihmisoikeustilanteeseen. Tämän illan verkkolähetyksen aiheena on, missä menee antisemitismin ja Israelin arvostelun raja. Vieraasta johtuen tämän illan keskustelu käydään englannin kielellä. Jokainen webinaaritapahtuma ilta tallentuu kuitenkin tapahtuman YouTube-kanavalle, joka löytyy osoitteesta bit.ly/lahi-ita, josta ne ovat jälkeenpäin katseltavissa suomeksi tekstitettynä. Ensi torstain webinaari Iranin uhka ja vähemmistöjen haaste Lähi-idässä on kokonaan suomenkielinen. Lähi-itä murroksessa webinaarisarjan tarjoaa Israel-ystävyystoimikunta. Tulevista webinaareista löydät infoa Facebookista ja netistä googlaamalla Lähi-itä murroksessa. Tämän illan keskustelun vetäjänä toimii European Coalition for Israel-järjestön toiminnanjohtaja Tomas Sandell, ja hän esittelee seuraavaksi illan keskustelijat. Tomas, ole hyvä.
Good evening, everyone. Also from my side, I am Tomas Sandell, and this is the European report, which this week is done together with Israel-related organizations in Finland. We have an annual event where we discuss issues related to the Middle East. But today we are going to focus on the situation for European Jewry, but also the situation for the Jewish community in Finland. So with those kind words from Pasi Turunen, which may need some translation to Katharina von Schnurbein, we will simply start this discussion, and I was promised to present the two panelists. And from your right-hand side, Katharina von Schnurbein, who is the EU coordinator in the combat against anti-Semitism and for fostering Jewish life. And Yaron Nadbornik, who is the head of the Jewish community in Finland. But if I start with you, Katharina, you are not the first time in a European Coalition for Israel event, but for the Finnish community, this may be the first time that you have met with the Jewish community in Finland and those interested in issues related to Judaism and to Jewish life. So if I may start with a very simple question, what exactly does an EU coordinator do in Brussels?
Yes, good evening, Tomas and Yaron. It's a real pleasure to be with you and to be again with the European Coalition for Israel, with whom we have a very long-standing relationship already for many years. So I commend your work, and it's always good to be with you. I was appointed in 2015 in December, as it became more and more evident that anti-Semitism was significantly on the rise and became also more visible across Europe. The reaction of the Commission was to say we need to ensure that there is an entry port, let's say, for the Jewish communities to understand better how the situation is on the one side, but also to have an office that makes policy recommendations and advises the political level. So it's these three aspects really that have guided my work over the past 5 years. And I've been in very close touch with the Jewish community. Unfortunately, I've never had the chance to visit the Jewish community in Finland so far, but Yaron I've met many times at different occasions in Brussels and elsewhere. And I've been in touch on other occasions with also the Protestant Church in my previous responsibility as advisor to the dialogue with religions to President Barroso, President of the European Commission. So the importance really is of our work to ensure that we have, on the one side, a European approach with regards to using all the instruments that we have in the fight against anti-Semitism, and on the other side, ensure that the approach really trickles down with regards to the actions of the member states, but even further into society. For example, we recently signed, together with other special envoys, a recommendation for football clubs to ensure that they fight anti-Semitism, and maybe we'll come to this a bit later when we talk about how one can best fight it.
Thank you, Katharina, and we certainly have a lot to discuss this evening, and to come back to your excellent work that you are doing in Brussels. But Yaron Nadbornik, you are here in Helsinki. You are the head of the Jewish community in Finland, which is not a very large community, perhaps one of the smallest in Europe. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the Jewish community in Finland?
Well, typically people are surprised to know that there's more than 2 Jews in Finland. We actually have 2,000 Jews, out of which about 50-60% are members of the organized Jewish communities. And it is an old community from the sense that around the 1850s, the first communities, in the sense, were established by the current and former soldiers in the Tsar's army in that part of the Russian Empire, which was today known as Finland. And Jews have had a interesting and complex ride in Finnish history, from the fact that we actually we're the last ones in Europe to be able to apply for civil rights, not maybe because of the anti-Semitic bias of Russia or Finland, but interestingly, there was a law prior in Sweden, when Finland was part of Sweden until 1809, that forbade Jews from living in 3 cities, in Gothenburg, Norrköping, and Stockholm, all of which are in that part of Sweden, in current Sweden, not in this part of Sweden, which is current Finland. So Jews actually weren't allowed to live. So my grandfather's grandfather had to apply, and his kids had to apply for residency permits every 6 months to be able to stay in Finland. So the fact that we are here, it's, you know, a civil war and 3 other wars later, we're still here. We have a great community life going on, a beautiful synagogue and a couple of Finnish-speaking rabbis, and our own school, a day school that just turned 100 years a couple of years ago, daycare, and all kinds of activities, very active things for young adults and older senior citizens. And so it's a really wonderful community. I wish anyone and everyone, after the global pandemic that we're in, that please come and visit. We're more than happy to host you and meet with you and start a dialogue with you.
I'm sure that extension of a welcome goes especially to Katharina von Schnurbein, and I'm sure that she's very eager, on the top of her list, once the pandemic is over, to come and finally visit Helsinki and the wonderful community here. But Yaron, if I stay with you for another few moments, you live in Finland, and Finland is known as a peaceful country. It's a country with the happiest people in the world. So are there any challenges for the Jewish community in Finland?
Well, I think most Finns were shocked some years ago that Finland was chosen as the happiest country in the world. I don't think anyone still really believes it, but people keep on saying it, so it must be true. There are quite a few challenges, actually. On the surface, things are fine. The community members are well integrated into Finnish society. We've had quite a few newcomers since the early 80s from Russia, Israel, US, France, Venezuela, you name it. It's a quite multicultural Jewish community that we actually have in today's life. But I started as the president of the Jewish community in Helsinki in 2010. And since 2015, I've been the president of the Central Council. And honestly, to my surprise, I expected that, I would be in charge of kind of like building a community in sense of belonging, young families involved, and so on. And that's true. That's what we've done. Economic issues and whatnot, and security things. All of these I, in a way, expected. But what I actually didn't expect to face would be all of these human rights issues. And it is a little bit surprising that in today's age, when we are a free country with a liberal democracy, beautiful republic, with one of the best success stories in European history since 1918 or 1917, however you want to calculate from. Today we have to face so many human rights issues. If you look at hate crimes, there really isn't a way of categorizing or fighting hate crimes in Finnish society by legal means. We won one court case that took 5 years against a self-confessed bigot and anti-Semite who still today finances far-right activities in Finland and has big department stores where the proceeds go to supporting the far-right. And then we have all these other issues, circumcision, for young non-medically motivated circumcision, which is actually the same as medically motivated circumcision, but because it's religiously motivated, this is in question constantly. The right for ritual slaughter, it's in question in Finland if you can or cannot do it. There's a requisition of simultaneous stunning and cutting. And I spoke with a lot of people in Finland. I always say, you know what? If I would take our need for slaughter for religious reasons, and I would take the word religious and substitute with the word cultural, this would be okay. People are, what do you mean? Well, if I take an example, for example, hunting or bullfighting. In Portugal and Sweden, there's Portugal and Spain, that's seen as a cultural heritage. And these events are excluded in the Commission's regulation number 1099-2009. Why? In addition, cultural traditions refer to an inherited, established, or customary pattern of thought, action, or behavior, which includes, in fact, the concept of something transmitted by or acquired from a predecessor. How are our religious rights in any way different from this? It's just I substitute one word, and anything crazy is actually completely allowed. I can go hunting where 30% of the animals are suffering in the forest before they actually get the second or the third shot. I can go bullfighting in Spain or Portugal. I can torture animals as much as I want. But if I say I'm Jewish and I want to do ritual slaughter based on the same, actually exact same requirements and predicament and requirements that these people have, it's not allowed. In many European countries today, it's actually made very difficult. And these are the certain things where there is this kind of bias against religious minorities already at a quite high level. It makes it quite difficult to kind of exist as a minority. And if I look back at, the terrible events of the Second World War, when the rights of the Finnish Jews were actually protected on every level and not put in question at any moment, then today we have to go meet ministry officials, we have to go meet these and those people and explain that we have the right to exist, and please don't make Judaism illegal in Finland. Let us exist. This is very difficult. And if we take hate crimes, you know what police officers spend the most of their time looking into when they research a hate crime? If it is a crime at all. Like, it's different. If you look at a murder, right, or robbery, police immediately say, okay, this is a crime, this is not a crime, this is a crime, this is not a crime. Then they start investigating. In these hate crimes, they spend a year, 2 years, maybe even 3, looking into the fact, is it a crime or is it not a crime? And then they prosecute or they might not prosecute. I was actually in a debate two years ago with the Interior Ministry of Finland, organized together with them and the Muslim network. It was about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And I was mentioning different cases of anti-Semitism. For example, outside the house of a quite well-known Jewish person, there was a sticker that says, in the Talmud, it says non-Jews are not humans, and all Jews want to kill non-Jews, and like crazy stuff like this. And there was a police officer specialized in hate crimes, and he told me, yeah, we decided not to prosecute because that's true. There's a lot of, crazy misinformation available that people choose to believe. The far right has built-in web pages where they kind of like build these kind of crazy stories that are not accurate and twist the researchers' information that's available. But I'll hand over the word to another person now.
Thank you so much. And there was a lot to take in. But Katharina von Schnurbein, how does this sound from a European perspective? Is what Yaron Nadbornik is sharing, is it typical throughout the EU? Or how would you compare the situation in Finland with the rest of Europe? Let's hear from the EU.
I have to unmute myself. Voila. So if I maybe can respond directly to one aspect that Yaron mentioned, which is the one about hate speech, so speech inciting to hatred and violence, and how that it needs to be prosecuted. So in fact, there is legislation on European level since 2008 that prohibits and criminalizes speech inciting to hatred and violence when it is directed against a group and based on your race, color, religion, descent, national or ethnic origin. And in February, the European Commission has opened a so-called infringement procedure against Finland for not transposing this part of the legislation correctly. And to ensure that in the future, when you are discriminated or attacked based on these grounds, that there is a prosecution, and in fact, an aggravated prosecution, because it concerns hate speech. There is another aspect in this specific legislation, I just mentioned it briefly, which relates to Holocaust denial and condoning the Holocaust, where there is also Finland has failed to ensure that it is a criminal offense. And this is another aspect where we have asked Finland now in a formal procedure to come in line with European legislation that, after all, has been there since 2008, and to which Finland also agreed in the European Council at the time. So just to show you a very concrete example how, from a European perspective, we can actually also very concretely then ensure that the situation, hopefully for minorities, and including the Jewish minority, will improve. In general terms, to what Yaron said, unfortunately, I think we have to say we see these debates in several countries. Debates on the one side about the lack of recognition of what anti-Semitism is and how it can manifest itself today. That it, unfortunately, anti-Semitism, we see that the old forms continue to exist while new forms have added on. So we see the old racist ideologies. We see the conspiracy myths that were very prevalent also, for example, already in the 19th century, but much older. But still, we saw the Dreyfus trials, for example, at the time. And then the racist ideas that led to the Shoah. And after the Shoah, where we could have thought that finally there's an end to anti-Semitism, we created new forms. And one of them is Holocaust denial, as I said, which is criminalized across the EU. And the other one is Israel-related anti-Semitism after Israel was created. So it's very important to recognize all these forms. And for that, we have acknowledged and adopted the so-called IHRA definition, which is a definition by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance on anti-Semitism, which lists in examples the various forms of contemporary anti-Semitism. And we have encouraged member states of the EU to adopt this definition and to ensure that it is also applied, which means you need to, for example, train your police officers, your law enforcement agencies, to ensure that they recognize anti-Semitism when they see it. The same is also true for teachers, for educators, to recognize anti-Semitism when they hear something in the courtyard. In some countries, unfortunately, "you Jew" has become a real slur word again. So it's very important to train teachers to be equipped and empowered to address these forms. And with regards to ritual slaughter, do I have another minute, Thomas? Okay? Yeah, okay. Ritual slaughter is also a debate that comes up in different countries from time to time. Not all of them. Some also explicitly allow it, but I believe that no matter what happens actually in the end in the parliaments, because in most countries coarse slaughtering and also circumcision is allowed. But the problem is already much earlier. It's really the debate that takes place that puts Jews into, and by the way, also Muslims, into a corner of being backwards, of wanting to molest children or wanting to be cruel towards animals. It's this perception that is so tedious and so mean. And I think this is what we have to acknowledge and to see how we reconcile the tendencies that are there in society, and also aspects of freedom of speech, and on the other side, ancient traditions that, as Yaron also showed, are one tradition, if among many other areas with regards to, for example, animal welfare. Yeah, so I think it's very important to recognize this, and this is closely related to the aspects of Jewish life and how Jews see a future for themselves in Europe and in their respective country where they are.
Thank you, Katharina. And maybe we can go back to Yaron Nadbornik, and because Katharina, you raised the issue of the IHRA working definition on anti-Semitism. Maybe we should, maybe I can come back to you, Katharina, and with a few words, could you explain what it is and how it came about? And after that, I will come back to Helsinki and ask Yaron if it has any practical effect in the Jewish community in Finland. But let us stop for a moment, because many people hear about the IHRA working definition. But how would you explain it for a layperson, Katharina?
So the definition itself is rather short. It is about a certain perception of Jews, where Jews are portrayed in a denigrating way, let's say. But then the document itself has a number of examples which refer to the different forms of anti-Semitism that I mentioned before. So it is the racist idea of looking down on somebody, of seeing somebody as inferior, which culminated in the racial laws and in the Holocaust. It's also the idea of making mendacious statements about Jews, about the conspiracy ideologies and myths that we see, and we have seen, by the way, skyrocketing in the dovetailing COVID and the pandemic now, in particular online, which is very worrying, because we know that okay, you've shared your screen, I see. Because we know that conspiracies can very easily actually transpose to the streets and expose themselves in demonstrations or even in attacks against the Jewish community, as we have seen, for example, at the synagogue in Halle in 2019. Yeah, it was somebody who was really driven by conspiracy and the idea that the Jews are here to replace the German population by migrants. And we see from our surveys that we have done among 16,500 Jews in Europe, unfortunately, the Jewish community in Finland was too small to be polled in a representative way. However,
we're growing.
Good. But we see that from what the respondents tell us about what they perceive as anti-Semitism, these examples are congruent basically with the answers from that survey. So although the definition itself was drafted already in 2005 and then was adopted by the IHRA formally in 2016, actually it reflected already very well the different forms, including also the references to Israel, when Israel is held accountable or the Jews, sorry, the Jews here are held accountable for actions of the state of Israel, while at the same time, the definition also said that criticizing Israel the same way as you would any other country cannot be considered anti-Semitic. So the allegations that are sometimes made that this infringes on freedom of speech are actually not true, because you can say things, criticize the government as you could any other government, but when it is about, therefore, for example, Israel should not exist, that is clearly anti-Semitic and unacceptable. So,
thank you. Yeah, sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, it's fine.
Yeah, no, just to say that you answered a question that we were going to come back to, and that's of course the line between legitimate criticism of the state of Israel and what is anti-Semitism. So thank you for making that clear as well. But over to you, Yaron. The IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, does it have any effect in normal everyday life for the Jewish community? And how is it with the Finnish government, the Finnish authorities? Have they adopted the definition, and can you see this taking effect and making life easier for your community, Yaron?
Well, we started a dialogue about 5 years ago with the Finnish government, and mostly the Interior Ministry, because they were invited to these European level meetings on anti-Semitism, and I think they were a bit surprised. They're a bit like, anti-Semitism in Finland? We don't have anti-Semitism in Finland. I think that was the bureaucrats and the government officials' response, and it first a little bit shocked me, but then again I came to the conclusion that actually we've been quite quiet about it. We've not been in the public eye, and it's really been, I think, a choice for decades for our community not to, seek too much attention, historic reasons, and these and those, all kinds of reasons. But I found that way doesn't really work. People just don't know about you. They don't know about your issues, and therefore you don't have any issues if you don't know about them. So we started speaking about them and started this dialogue, and it a little bit has become a lot better, and it in a way culminated, or then started quite nicely this last fall when we had a training session by the Anti-Defamation League, which is an American association, for the Interior Ministry and about 30 police officers and the center level command of the Finnish police, to train them about what is anti-Semitism and how is the Finnish extremists, how they connect to anti-Semitism. And I think the people there, I was also listening, got a lot of information on how actually, for example, the Finnish far right and people who are in Finland seen as buffoons actually incite, train, and educate globally on anti-Semitism, and how this is a very, very well-funded, very active global ring of hate mongers. And I think that really opened quite a few eyes. Now, when we talk about the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, the Finnish government says, yes, we approve and we acknowledge, but on the other hand, there is an issue in the legislation. There is this, you can take someone to court for incitement against ethnic group. This you can do. It's quite difficult to achieve, but you can do it. You need to do all the documentation for the police. You need to go through all the legal stipulation. You need to chew it really ready for them, and then they'll possibly take it to the prosecutor. The prosecutor will possibly prosecute, not for sure. If they start prosecuting, it takes about 5 years to get a conviction that sticks in the high court. Then they pay 10,000 euros in fines, 40,000 euros in fine, depending on the income, and they start another organization. They move all the data, all the information on another web page, and it continues. So that's the situation we're in. And now we're talking about the IHRA definition. It does help us because we have things black on white in Finnish, English, Swedish, you name the language, to show them that this actually constitutes anti-Semitism. Holocaust denial is not illegal in Finland. Basically, all those things that constitute anti-Semitism, most of them by the IHRA definition, are not illegal in Finland. It's very difficult to get it in the law because the law is very general on purpose. And the best way is to educate government officials. Now, again, we're looking at a Jewish community with 2,000 people, maybe 1,100 members, of which we don't employ even one political lobbyist. Now we rely on volunteers to start educating the Finnish police corps and prosecutors and so on. it's a massive magnitude of a mission. We are very grateful to the European Union for providing information. It's wrong to call it pressure. It's not really pressure, but like just asking Finland to comply with their legislative requirements. There's not much going to happen on that field, that's for sure. It's not going to be an initiative in the parliament. It will not be an initiative of the government because it's not a major issue. It only constitutes about 2,000 people. But what they fail to see is that anti-Semitism is not worrying for the future of Jews. It is worrying for the future of Europe. Why? Because if it starts with anti-Semitism, it never ends with anti-Semitism. That's why we are so vocal about anti-Semitism. And I choose to be vocal as a president of the Jewish community about anti-Semitism because it endangers the European way of life when you neglect a small, tiny group, because who is next after that? And it really opens a big can of worms. And I really wish that in Finland, the government officials would take more of an initiative and put, for example, Holocaust denial as something that is illegal. On the other hand, it opens another can. Well, where do we stop then? If that's illegal, then this is illegal. And that's the same debate that we had with the government when we asked for funding for the security measurements. They said, well, if we have to fund your security, we have to fund the security of everybody. I said, yes, you are correct. If another community is facing similar kind of attacks and death threats and terrorist attacks on a pan-European level as we do, then definitely you have to fund their security. Yes, but that the police is in charge of security. I said, oh, okay, police is in charge. Who protects the parliament, by the way? Well, they're private security guards. And how are they paid? They're not paid for by the police. They're paid for by the government. Okay, so if they're paid for by the government, how can we not get help for our security needs when we have it actually is quite similar level of threat, in fact, even though you say that the threat is not the highest possible. Fine, but it's the same as the parliament and these kind of places. Then, I think you should chip in. And thanks to EU support now, in the recent years, we did get change in this aspect because of the decision by the European Commission. I think it was 2018. They took that European countries have to finance the security, or mitigate against the security threats of Jewish communities. And I think that was a very, very wise decision. But on the other hand, we have to look at for all minorities. We're not only talking about the Jewish minority. The fact of the matter is that if we start building societies where we forget the weakest, then we are not strong. We are only as strong as our weakest link in the society. And I think that's why Jewish communities matter. That's why other minorities matter. And that's why the majority matters, because we need to build one society. We don't have another one to go to.
Thank you, Yaron. And maybe this would bring us back to Katharina again on the issue of security. You mentioned, Yaron, that the situation is not satisfactory in Finland, and not being of the Jewish community, we find this very horrendous in a way that in the first place that you would need security, which the majority religions in Finland do not in any instance. But how is it? You mentioned then the resolution or from the European Commission. Can you elaborate, Katharina, a little bit? What can the European Commission do to protect Jewish life in a very concrete way by ensuring that the national authorities do enough?
Yeah, so we've been very clear that with regards to the member states, it's the member states' responsibility to protect their citizens. And for example, to make a risk analysis together with the group concerned as to, how is the situation, what is needed, and then also pay for the instruments and the manpower that is needed in order to ensure the safety. So there was indeed a declaration in 2018 which started from the aspect of security, in the understanding that if you don't feel secure in your country, in your town, you don't want to stay. You think about leaving. And as we all, and I think that Yaron said very clearly, anti-Semitism is a threat to yes, the Jews above all, but it's a threat to democracy, it's a threat to us all. So Europe has never fared well when the Jews thought about leaving. And we saw also in our surveys that there is a very high number, namely 40%, that say that in the last year I've thought about leaving my country. So this is something that rings all alarm bells. We have subsequently created a working group where we bring together 2 government officials from each country, plus the head of the Jewish community or someone designated by the head of the Jewish community, the elected one, into a so-called working group, and where we discuss different aspects of this declaration. The first one in June 2019 was on security. And we give best practices. We show how things are being done in some countries where it's already advanced and where there are good structures in place. And then we give them time to discuss among themselves. So Yaron with the representatives of the Finnish government to discuss what is needed actually in the national context to advance and to ensure the security. And we did the same for education and Holocaust remembrance, for the use of the IHRA definition. And also now the next step is that we expect, and by the way, I mean, all member states have adopted this declaration, including also Finland, by unanimity in December 2018. We expect the member states to come up with national strategies against anti-Semitism, or with specific actions that they can place into their existing strategies against racism, but they have to be specific and they really have to address the different aspects that we see that are a threat to the Jewish community. And so we continue this dialogue with the member states and the Jewish communities in Brussels, and we will, on top of this, now come with our own EU strategy, the first ever strategy against anti-Semitism on EU level that will be adopted in the fourth quarter of this year. We have also, in very concrete terms, for example, launched a call for proposals where on the security of places of worship, where there is concrete funding was available for either organizations or also member states authorities with regards to improving the security for places of worship. And there, for example, we had a lot of dialogue with the Jewish umbrella organizations that deal with security in Brussels beforehand to ensure that this really fits the purpose. Yeah. So this, I think, is where we can help to show, where does something work well, and then give the time to ensure that in the national structures that can be adapted. And maybe one aspect with regards to the IHRA definition, we've also issued a very concrete help here, a handbook on the use of the IHRA definition to help the member states authorities with concrete examples in concrete countries that are already taking place, and for them to see how can we actually use this in our training, in our recognition of anti-Semitism, in our actions. And so it's that kind of very concrete support that we provide.
Thank you, Katharina.
Just to clarify one thing here, in all my statements before, what I want to make clear is that I don't think that Finland is having a problem with fighting anti-Semitism because it is an anti-Semitic country. On the contrary, Finland is not an anti-Semitic country. That is why it is having problems fighting with anti-Semitism, because they don't recognize anti-Semitism per se. Already in 2015, the Norwegian government released a very beautiful guide by the Interior Ministry about how to fight anti-Semitism. They had huge issues during the Second World War with internal and external anti-Semitism, as we know. The government in Sweden, to these meetings that you described by the EU, I was participating in a meeting. They sent 3 high-ranking officials from 3 different ministries to participate. Why? Because they have a huge image issue. When somebody in the Jewish world says Sweden, people think anti-Semitism, because that's how far the situation has gone there. Whereas, for example, in Finland, there was one EU meeting in Brussels about Holocaust, and they thought, well, that's an educational issue. Like, why should we send people from the Interior Ministry? It should be somebody from the Educational Ministry. I was in one meeting where I was sitting next to a summer intern because the more senior person couldn't make it because of some other things and so on. So there's a lot of issues with prioritization, and also the fact that Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism is not really seen as a legislative issue, because legislative processes take a long time. There you have to have involvement from members of parliament, you have to have ministries preparing the initiative, you have to have understanding of anti-Semitism, you have to have understanding of hate crimes. Finland is a very mono-ethnic society. Not only in recent years we've had quite a few people from different backgrounds, but actually because of this, there's not a lot of understanding of being the other, of being the minority. Therefore, there's also not much understanding of how to protect the minorities. So I would say we have the other aspect of the issue, because we haven't had a lot of anti-Semitism historically. We are not having the means of fighting anti-Semitism currently.
Thank you, Yaron, for the clarification. And what I wanted to say is that we have promised the viewers that they can send in their questions. And as from now, I will take some of the questions and direct them to either one of the panelists. There is one to Yaron Nadbornik, perhaps as a follow-up from something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned the threat from the extreme right wing. Here's a question to say that if there are other, what about the extreme left, or other threats coming to the Jewish community in Finland?
Well, when I talk about threats, it's a little bit of an 80s versus this decade game. A lot of reporters ask me, what are the threats that you're getting? I always said, it's not the threats that we're actually interested in or worried about. It's when the threats aren't coming that we get really worried. Talk about Halle, talk about Pittsburgh, talk about San Diego, talk about Copenhagen. There were no threats. Toulouse, Brussels, no threats, no threats, no threats. So this, in that sense, is not actually, it's not what we're really looking out for. Left anti-Semitism, it's institutional, definitely. It very much grouped around the Israel issue. This is an anti-Semitism you might see, be kicked in the shin or spat on or yelled at, which is like anti-Semitism as we understand it historically. Of course, there's a lot of anti-Semitism from the Middle East. People who move in, who have been looking at state television, where they're told that the Israelis, or in Arabic it's called Yahud, it's the same as Jews, are doing horrible things to Palestinians and Muslims, and lies like this that they get in the television. They are institutionally inclined towards being anti-Semitic in that sense, but they are not well organized. They are not well financed. In Finland, the far right is very well organized, very well financed, and globally linked. So this, I would say, is a much more pressing issue at the moment.
Would Katharina von Schnurbein want to add anything on a European level?
Well, what I can say is with regards to how the Jewish community is viewed, we posed that question in all member states in 2019 in a so-called Eurobarometer, and Finland is roughly in the European average, which means 55% view the Jews in Finland through the lens of the Middle East conflict. And that is a rather high percentage if you think that actually you see your neighbors through a conflict. And through a conflict where the usual perception is the Jews are the perpetrators and the Palestinians are the victims, and therefore then this idea can easily also be held towards your own Jewish community. So this is something that we have measured. There are large discrepancies between. Sweden is actually the highest, 85%, and then very low percentages in some of the Central and Eastern European countries. But I think this is something that is in a way worrying, because it's not easy to address. And I think it has to do with the lack of seeing the other and lack of having a conception of the identity that the other person might have, and so to address this, especially I think in a country where you have a small community and therefore the vast majority doesn't know Jews, that therefore then you can get even more ideas of and conspiracies that then can take root. So I think this is maybe one aspect that is that I see as worrying. In addition to the very real threat, I think just to finish out the real.
Sure.
The dangerous threat does come, I think, from right-wing extremism, not only in the Nordic countries, but in many other EU countries as well. And we are doing a lot in terms of counter-terrorism, counter-extremism, monitoring to better coordinate the responses on European level. Because they work very well across borders, and sometimes we don't.
On the other hand, this is a question that I think quite often, especially in Finland, confuses the Jewish community. That how can people see us through the Middle Eastern conflict? We've been here, some families 5 generations, some even the newcomers, 30, 40 years, paying their taxes, being involved, not causing any trouble. But I always say, listen. If your grandfather fought in the Winter War, in the Continuation War, all the people he was fighting with aren't here anymore. So when you walk in the street, have a funny name, look a little bit different. If you speak Swedish because of the Swedish expansionist policy from the 14th century, and you're in Finland because of Napoleon forced the Russians are to do, then people don't know that in the current state. So in a way, sometimes I've called myself, with a little bit jokingly, a 50.
Let's see. We may have a problem with the connection to the
fifth generation immigrant, because people always ask me where I'm from here and there. And that's always something that's part of the, in a way, where you're from. And this is why I'm very much into genealogical research.
Yaron, just to say that you were breaking up, but we hope that this last bit of the program that the connection will work. We have a question also. We have several questions with a similar message. One says, for example, I'm not a football star, but what can I do to subscribe to the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism? What can ordinary people do to fight anti-Semitism? And I think this goes to both of you, but Katharina, if we start in Brussels.
I think this is probably the most pertinent question there is, because we can do whatever we want in European level, unless it really trickles down through not only the national level and legislation and so on, which is important, but really into society, the things won't change. So I think there are two aspects. With regards to the IHRA definition, I think one can use it in one's own context. For example, we have seen NGOs adopting this definition, saying we take a stand against anti-Semitism as our responsibility towards society. So maybe it's a sport club or it's a bridge club or something, but we want to be as citizens also responsible with regards to society, in the understanding that anti-Semitism is a threat also to democracy. That's one aspect. The other one is really, I think, to have the courage to speak up, because I do think that we encounter anti-Semitic remarks every once in a while, and they can be hidden. They can be, in the form of a bad joke. And then it takes courage, especially if it's in the immediate environment, to speak up and say, I don't find this funny, or I don't think this is actually fair towards the Jews because, and to say that, and to then also, if necessarily, defend it. I think one needs to have a certain amount of determination to say, I will do that. And then with that, as I said, the difficult part is in the immediate environment, because what we see in the political sphere is often, that the right points to the left, or the left points to the right, and the right to the Islamists, and so on. It's very easy to point to the other. But when it comes to your own family, your own sports club, your own parents' association, it's more difficult. And there, I think we need civil courage, and that's important to train it while we can.
Yaron.
And it's always it's an interesting question. Should other people do more? And I think definitely yes. On the other hand, I do understand that it is hard to join a fight that you don't really recognize. For example, it took me years to really understand the suffering that sexual minorities are going through just to be accepted as equals in most European countries. So it's not an easy question. And of course, the thing is that if you don't talk about your own issues, then people don't know you have issues. But on the other hand, if you talk about your issues a little bit too much, people think, why is this person always talking about their issues? So it's a difficult balance to achieve, but there still is a balance.
Thank you, Yaron. And perhaps I could mention at this stage, some of you viewers are aware of our campaign to have faith communities adopt the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. And I think here, Yaron, we can be proud as Finns that when we did our Holocaust memorial, we had the Bishop of Helsinki speaking out on behalf of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Finland to say that they have adopted the IHRA working definition. And I was personally very, very proud to see that being the case. But certainly this is something that any local church anywhere in Europe can do, denomination, a network of churches. It doesn't have to be a bridge club or a football club or anything of that sort. So we can all contribute. We are drawing to a close. Katharina, there was a question. Someone was comparing the current pandemic to a pandemic that has been around for much, much longer, anti-Semitism. And they were wondering if you have the same budget as Ursula von der Leyen for the European-wide vaccination plan against this virus. Do you need more resources?
Well, we don't have exactly the amount that Next Generation Europe program has. However, I have to say that Ursula von der Leyen has significantly improved and the support for this fight. She's personally engaged with this. We have received also more funds, more people. So, I do not complain, and I believe that the important aspect is to ensure that we keep our ambition high to also end this type of virus and find a vaccine.
Maybe one of the last round of questions, Yaron Nadbornik, head of the Jewish community in Helsinki. Do you think that anti-Semitism can be defeated once and for all?
I don't think so. There's one good explanation why it can never be defeated is the fact that if an anti-Semite publishes on YouTube, online, different internet pages, or even publishes a newspaper where he publishes about how bad the Jews are, or other kind of really terrible lies accusing us of this and that. If we don't do anything, then those lies stay and people read and get convinced that this is correct, or the person themselves stay convinced that, well, nobody's challenging me. And if we challenge them and miraculously manage to get the police to look into the matter, get the prosecutor to prosecute, and we actually get a conviction in the third court level, which is the high court, in 5 years' time, well, then they say, you see, it's true. The Jews do control the media. The Jews do have all the power. So an anti-Semite will always be right in their own point of view. So you can minimize it. You can approach zero, but you will never reach zero, unfortunately. But we will keep on fighting anyway.
I'm not sure if I should ask the same question to Katharina von Schnurbein. She will be quoted by someone in saying this or that. Maybe you have
don't worry. I've participated in an event that was called "An End to Anti-Semitism!" ! No, but I agree with Yaron that with regards to the social media and the speed by which this, has become a super spreader of anti-Semitic and other forms of hate speech is very worrying and makes it all the more difficult to address it. But I learned from a commissioner for whom I worked for 5 years as spokesperson, who was dealing with unemployment, and it was a time where there was actually quite high unemployment. And I told him, why do you always talk about full employment? To be realistic, it's not possible. And he said, well, if I don't keep the aims high and highest as possible, we will not even achieve the minimum. And I think really this is true. Our goal must be to roll it back, to end it, knowing that it will take time, and we have to be very ambitious. We need a lot of coalitions with others in order to really address it. And also the communities among themselves need to have these coalitions to stand up for each other. And then I believe, can at least, and we have seen progress over the last 5 years, increase the acknowledgement of what it is, increase the knowledge, and therefore then also ensure that it will be addressed, including by law, which is, I think, relevant in the Finnish case with regards to also the infringement procedures that have now been formally opened, and therefore Finland will have to come in line with these laws and these legislative requirements from European level.
Well, Katharina, we were very shocked to hear that Finland is not the best in the class. We always thought that to be the case, but I think it's important that we will be, and I think Yaron has pointed that out as well. That we need to make our government and authorities accountable. So, and we promise to do our utmost that this will be the case. I see that Pasi Turunen is joining us now in the program, and that means that we are bringing this to an end. I want to thank the panelists from my side. Katharina von Schnurbein, you continue to do an amazing job, not only in Europe, but on a global scale, in fighting anti-Semitism and also in fostering Jewish life. And Yaron Nadbornik, the Jewish community in Finland can be congratulated to have a very articulate chair, a very young chair, by the way. I think you were the youngest when you were appointed some 11 years ago, and you're still very young. And we wish you all the luck.
I'm 15.
We wish you all the luck in the municipal elections, which we know that you are running in. We cannot, of course, mention what party or what number, but I think anywhere you can make a contribution in Finnish society, it will be most welcome. So from my side and the European Report and the European Coalition for Israel, I want to thank you all. If you want more information on the work that we do, you can go to our website, ec4i.org. And also subscribe to our newsletter, which is available also in Finnish. So over to you, Pasi Turunen, and from my side, thank you and good evening from Helsinki.
Thank you, Katharina von Schnurbein from Brussels. Thank you so much for joining us. Kiitos Yaron Nadbornik jälleen, kiitos myöskin European Coalition for Israel -järjestön toiminnanjohtaja Tomas Sandell tästä mielenkiintoisesta illasta ja keskustelusta. Mieleeni palautui radio-ohjelma, jonka tein kauan sitten holokaustista selviytyneen Pavel Stranskin kanssa. Kysyin häneltä ohjelmassa yhdessä vaiheessa, että mitä hän ajattelee, vieläkö nykypäivänä ilmenee antisemitismiä. Ja Pavel Stranski kertoi, miten hänellä oli tapana kysyä työtovereiltaan vapautumisen jälkeen, kun hän lopulta löysi työtä ja hän halusi kokeilla, että onko hänen työtovereidensa keskuudessa antisemitismiä, niin hän kysyi heiltä, että aina kun maailmassa tapahtuu jotain pahaa tai kamalaa, niin syyttäkää juutalaisia tai polkupyöräilijöitä. Ja hänen työtoverinsa ihmettelivät ja sanoivat, Pavel, minkä ihmeen takia polkupyöräilijöitä? Ja Pavel sanoi, teidän olisi pitänyt kysyä, minkä ihmeen takia juutalaisia. Lähi-itä murroksessa webinaari jatkuu torstaina. Silloin aiheena on Iranin uhka ja kristillinen ja juutalainen identiteetti Lähi-idässä, Lähi-idän murroksessa. Paljon kiitoksia seurasta ja oikein hyvää illan jatkoa kaikille.